Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. The freedom of a nation will fail if citizens demand the benefits of ordered liberty but refuse to live a virtuous life that, frankly, gives liberty its moral spine, so to speak. Our present social disorder, our disharmony right now, is only surprising if we actually believed our republic could survive after we stopped forming entire generations in conscience and virtue. We took God out of the picture. Man has forgotten God, and we wonder why we have massacred each other. Any student of our history will know that our founding fathers never imagined liberty as a permission for every appetite under the sun. In fact, they did not want every appetite to receive legal protection. They inherited an older political tradition. They saw freedom as a disciplined moral exercise. John Adams, probably the founding father I quote the most, wrote, "Our Constitution was made for only a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." That sentence is inconvenient to modern sensibilities because it says that the constitutional order presumes a moral order, and it also explains why our society that has forgotten virtue will turn politics into a public brawl. As I've said before, our politics are a circus. We've elected clowns into public office. We celebrate the pies to the face, and then we wonder why we are the laughingstock. George Washington warned us too, with grave sobriety, I might add. He knew that our revolutionary victory could decay into a civic suicide if we were not careful. And so, in his farewell address, he wrote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are the indispensable supports." Again, one of the quotes I draw from a lot. And he warned us that we could have a fantasy about a kind of national morality, but if you take religion and the religious principle out of it, you will curtail that national morality. You will stifle it. You've chosen disorder. He knew that a free people requires internal government of our passions and morality before we can even begin to talk about an external governmental structure. If citizens lose the capacity of self-command and self-regulation, the state has now been axiomatically given that command. I mean, that's elementary wisdom. When we take a look at a culture that's unable to govern itself virtuously, we want to turn to a stronger source and say, hey, tell us what to do. And that's exactly what we've done with our government. St. Augustine of Hippo, he taught us a tremendous amount about our political reality. He saw it through the wound of fallen man. If you've ever read The City of God, it's a gargantuan work, I know. But he famously asks the question, justice being taken away then, what are kingdoms but great robberies? Now, I would love if that line was carved over every single state and federal edifice and institution. And frankly, probably over a few faculty lounges if I could have my way. Augustine's point is devastating and painstakingly simple. If you sever political power from justice, then all you've done is crowned the appetite of the day. So you can say, I have committees, I have budgets, I have subcommittees, I have structure, I have flags. You can say all of that. All of these will pale in comparison without virtuous justice. All we've done is crowned the desire of the day. That's why we wonder why progressivist ideology gained a legislative foothold. That's exactly why. That's why virtue cannot be treated as an optional thing in a republic. Virtue is the interior condition. It makes political liberty possible. Aristotle understood this long before America even existed. He argued that the city comes into being for the sake of living, but it exists for the sake of living well. Anyone who's read Aristotle's Politics knows this line from Book 1. He understood politics is never morally empty. The very engagement of politics is a moral exercise. And if you take morality out of the public sphere, you will have a political order that tries to form the conscience in a different way, and it's always badly. It's like leaving your children in a casino hoping that they don't develop a gambling habit. It's ridiculous. Aquinas, when in his Summa Theologiae, he combines Aristotle's practical wisdom, natural wisdom, with the Christian revelation, and he says this: the proper effect of law is to lead its subjects to their proper virtue, which is their proper end. That's in the Prima Secunda Pars. It doesn't mean that civil law can replace God, or grace for that matter, but it does mean that law has to be written in such a way that it has a pedagogical function. Repeated actions will shape the human person. Good law supports virtue. Bad law licenses vice. And that's why a civilization cannot endlessly normalize moral disorder and then act like we're amazed when citizens begin to act in a disordered manner, which is exactly what we're doing. Our founders once again understood this not just through natural law, but through the Judeo-Christian worldview. For example, the Northwest Ordinance, this was in 1787, it declared religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools, and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Notice that order: religion, morality, knowledge. That's a civilized sequence. You reverse that, or pervert that, or remove that, and all you've gotten is a society of brutes, for whom their appetite ought to be crowned. Everyone asks why the obsession of the self today. The self is nothing more than my present appetite that I want validation for in the public sphere. James Madison had a view of human nature that gave our Constitution its architecture. Federalist 51, if men were angels, everyone knows this quote, no government would be necessary. He didn't build a republic for angels. Our founders built a republic with a tradition that knew that we were wounded by fallenness and concupiscence. Power had to check power. Madison's constitutional machinery presumed, though, that even in the checks and balances of power, we would have some measure of virtue amongst those who occupy those offices and the citizenry. Checks and balances are good. They can restrain ambition and appetite for a season, but they cannot save us if we've willingly ceded the moral ground to whatever appetite rises today. And that's the political danger of our modern autonomy. We want freedom detached from truth and virtue. That kind of freedom lies the way of madness. It needs reason. Reason needs truth. Truth needs a moral order. Plato warned us of this in his Republic, that excessive liberty can quickly pass into excessive slavery. And his account is exactly what we're going through today. That's why the Church's political wisdom is the only structure we're talking about. Catechism 1903, authority is exercised legitimately only when it seeks the common good of the group concerned, and if it employs morally licit means to attain it. Forget that, and you've forgotten the meaning of having a political order, period. The common good is the entire end of a political government, of a societal structure. The health of a political life depends on the health of its moral life. And that's why the loss of virtue always produces political violence. Because when prudence dies, citizens stop talking, deliberating, discussing, seeking the truth. And inevitably, they look into themselves and they see their passions screaming. They find others who are like-minded, band themselves into tribalism, and then lambast anyone who disagrees with them as hateful bigots who are not just critiquing poor appetite, they are attacking our identity and ourself. Well, the inevitable conclusion is violent self-defense. And then the experts will arrive to study the bloodshed and then wonder, I wonder what happened. I'm sorry, the remedy we need is not legislation. Families, this is where it has to begin. We have to form our children in self-mastery from the get-go. Schools must either be robbed of the capacity to deform children, or we need to form schools of our own that can actually form our children in the literate ways of wisdom and virtue. Churches, we need to preach conversion into virtue boldly and constantly. Civic institutions, frankly, there are some laws that need to be rewritten. where we reward responsibility and virtue, not decisions that are the result of vice that perpetuate more vice. It's not complicated. We know how to do this. We did it for over 100 years. It's just uncomfortable. The Christian answer, however, is in Christ. The church knows virtue is only possible through grace. Augustine knew the earthly city will forever be marked by disordered love. He wrote, "The two loves have made two cities. Love to self, even to contempt of God, the earthly city. Love of God, even to contempt of self, the heavenly city." Our politics must be judged by the order of what we love. If we love God, we will understand that we're willing to forego even earthly pleasure and earthly gains for the sake of a society that serves the common good. But people centered on self-will will create a politics of domination. And once we do that, we will destroy each other. That's why the church's position is the virtuous mean. She calls the nations to justice. She calls us to conversion. Our freedom is fulfilled in Christ's truth only. Once we know the truth will make us free. Free not to act on every impulse, free to live as we ought. A biblical covenantal worldview begins here. God made us for communion with Him. Sin fractures that communion. Christ restores it by His blood. Our political life will never replace that covenant. But political life can be healed by citizens who live in a Judeo-Christian worldview. And our republic needs virtue. Virtue needs Jesus' truth. Truth is Jesus Christ. Stay tuned for the next hour. I'm Marcus Peter.